Hi everyone, and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be discussing the 2022 Booker Prize winner, which is The Seven Moons of Maali, Almeida by Shehan Karunatilaka. This actually came out in 2020 under a different title. It was called Chats with the Dead, which I only raised because I think that's also a really cool title for this book. But I'm really excited because I enjoyed this a lot, and I feel like last year I had very long periods where I didn't read anything that excited me. And this book I think is really satisfying and really something that I want to recommend that you guys check out. So I went to Sri Lanka over the Chinese New Year holiday with my parents, and I really wanted to read a book about Sri Lanka, and this was what I settled on. It came highly recommended, and it also won the Booker Prize. The premise of this story is that we are in the first person point of view of our main character, Maali, and we start out with his death. We don't witness his death, but he's arrived in this kind of afterlife limbo where he has 7 moons or 7 days to decide whether he wants to ascend to the light. And throughout the novel, we find out that he has left a lot of baggage on Earth in Sri Lanka, in Colombo, in terms of unresolved matters to deal with. Maali is a photographer, but he's also a war photographer. He is kind of like a fixer or a stringer and has been involved in helping to take photos for multiple different parties, both from like the Sri Lankan military to foreign correspondents to just anyone who kind of like will pay for his services. So the reason why I really like this book is because even though it's kind of a magical realist style of writing, obviously Maali is dead, there are a lot of spirits, there are a lot of demons, all of this is happening in a very fantastical world. It feels really real, and the description of Sri Lanka and everything that the country went through during the Civil War is not forced, but it's obviously in the foreground, and it is clearly like the main subject matter and the topic that Shehan wants to cover, but it never takes attention away from kind of the heart, like the beating heart and soul of the book, which I would say is really Maali's like relationships, both with his queer lover as well as his best friend. And just the voice of Maali as the main character I found to be flawed, but also very hopeful and earnest. He is someone who has really been worn down by all of the terrors and the cruelty of what he has experienced. He's taken photos of children being murdered, of entire villages being bombed, like really violent things, but you can still feel like the core of his being as someone who wants to do right by the people he cares about and who does care about his country and the state of affairs there. So I found him to be like a very complex and whole character, who's also like cheeky and also kind of funny and also a bit sarcastic. And so his interactions with like the different characters that he comes across as he's navigating this kind of, so he's able to navigate Sri Lanka and Colombo, but he's a spirit, right? So he can't be seen. And he also has access now to this whole world of spirits and demons that you can't see when you're a human and you're alive. So as he's navigating this kind of like spirit world, he has a lot of humor, which I feel prevent the book from being too depressing or too dark. The main impetus for the plot is that Maali is trying to figure out who his murderer is. And so there is kind of a thriller element throughout where you're slowly seeing things being pieced together. Another driver of the plot is and I'm not gonna spoil, but just to set up the premise, Maali has also taken photographs that are damning, and he has hidden the photographs and the negatives, and all of the interested parties are trying to track that down. And so you do have some clear impetuses, some drivers of the plot throughout the book. But to be honest, that wasn't really what hooked me the most. I mean, I did find the plot to be interesting and compelling. But for me, I was just super drawn in with the way that Karunatilaka uses his art and this project of fiction and this project of storytelling to really make someone who knows nothing about a country care about that country, and in a way that's not heavy-handed. I find that that's extremely rare and very hard to do, and to me that is like the ultimate power and magic of fiction and art. So at times it got a bit tedious because I really was coming in with zero knowledge, because I did Google and look up a lot of stuff, and that I think really improved my experience of reading the book, to know the history and to know like what the Death Squad was, or the Tamil pogroms, or all of these different actors that the author talks about. I really think it improved my overall enjoyment of the book. But I would say if you're the kind of person who doesn't know that much about Sri Lankan history, you might get a little bogged down in like not knowing what's going on. But I think that's fine. Like, I don't necessarily believe that fiction has to meet the reader where it is. Like, the reader, we should trust the reader to figure it out, and you don't have to know what every single historical reference or historical figure that he's kind of doing a riff off of is in order to enjoy this book. That's my opinion. I could see other people saying like, oh, maybe it's too specific and the culture is too different for you to really latch into it, but that wasn't the case for me at all. I found it like very gripping, and I felt very immersed in the world. And when I did stop to like look up certain cultural things or look up certain words, it just helped me feel even more immersed, if that makes sense. The main kind of like message I took away from this book is, I just think a really core theme was this juxtaposition of the living and the dead, and how humans can be so cruel and so violent and not really value, or they take for granted, how precious life is. And that juxtaposed with all of these spirits who have like different vendettas or different objectives kind of culminated in like a really nice reflection of this specific situation and all of the terror and war that's going on. There wasn't really like a heavy-handed point of view, except to just say like, isn't it shocking that this can exist? And that kind of like impartial almost depiction of all these things that are going on, I thought was really effective. I think one quote that really sums up this kind of impartial observer of violence perspective, but the quote is, "Magic isn't evil or good or black or white. It is like the universe, like every missing god, powerful and supremely indifferent." There's a lot of kind of this theme of the power of being organized, and how a lot of evil is perpetrated because of this infrastructure and this structure of being organized. And I get this sense from Shehan and from Maali and from kind of the Sri Lankan point of view that there's so much chaos, that so much slips through, and that part of not being able to stick up for the average like Sinhalese or Tamil or Burgher or whoever Sri Lankan citizen you want to pick out is because of this inefficiency and this inability to like organize and execute. But it's not really a judgment. I feel like it's more like a observation. And I also think it's cool that in this book, there is not like a full-blown or outright dismissal of the role of ghosts and spirits, and just kind of that acknowledgement and that recognition that maybe instead of us having our thoughts reeling around in our heads, it's actually like a spirit whispering in our ears, was like really delicious and really fun to read. And I feel like it takes us down a peg. Like, on Earth, we're so self-important and we just are so caught up in our individual missions and what we're trying to do. And I love this whole layer of like, maybe we're actually surrounded by ghosts and spirits and demons who are like actively trying to help us or hurt us all the time. I just feel like it's such a like satisfying and delicious like way to think about the world, and it helps us to be a little bit more like trust the universe, or like more go with the flow than feeling so self-important. So yeah, I haven't talked a lot about the plot because I don't want to spoil it, but I definitely recommend this book. I think I really like the structure. It's almost in the style of like short stories, but it's definitely a novel, but the chapters, or the 7 moons, which are the 7 main parts of the book, are broken up by almost little like vignettes, and we meet a lot of other secondary characters or minor characters that are very fruitful, and I feel like they pay off. The plot is fun to follow. The relationships are very sweet and like interesting and multifaceted. When you find out who Maali's killer is at the end, I don't know if you're gonna be able to guess. I feel like a more savvy reader could. I didn't. I'm not the savviest reader, but I do feel like the ending does pay off. And sprinkled throughout, there's a lot of really interesting reflections about warfare, tribalism. You learn a lot about the actual history of Sri Lanka, which was kind of one of my goals in picking up this book, but also just kind of a reflection on like what makes life worth living and like what we should do with our limited time here on Earth. And that combined with the playful and kind of like dynamic world of the afterworld made this a really enjoyable read for me. I think sometimes it got a bit tedious, and there are a lot of characters, and I had to kind of like slow myself down and really get in the right mindset to read it. But I think that's also just because all of our attention spans are totally destroyed by social media these days. So I would definitely recommend checking out The 7 Moons of Maali Almeida. I can see why it won the Booker, and I think it warrants a reread. Maybe later on I'll revisit this because I think there's so many layers to uncover in this book.